In this short class, I want to talk about two ideas. One is this issue of a narrow product line, and secondly, we want to talk about re-engineering. Now, we're not going to go into detail on these in this session, but we do want to introduce the ideas and plant the ideas so that we can effectively use them later. So we're going to start by talking about the narrow product line. Well, this tends to have higher production costs because output is lower. A narrow product line means one set of products are being produced. So output tends to be lower, so it has higher production costs. The fixed costs of production, for example, the buildings and the overheads in general, they are all borne by this single line of production, which means that production costs will tend to be higher. Total production cost, that is, not just the variable costs of production, the cost of the raw materials and the direct labour and the machinery and so on, but the costs of the overheads as well, when they are apportioned and brought to bear. So it is it's a higher cost system. A narrow product line tends to be higher cost. And it also reduces the opportunity for scale economies. Economies of scale are related to the size of the organization. Bigger organizations can imply more specialist machinery, more specialized personnel, and this ultimately reduces the cost per unit of making the product. Bigger organizations can negotiate finance better from the banks, cheaper perhaps. They can have specialist departments for research and development. So overall, larger organizations have more scale economies. Of course, large organizations can get too large where they're out of control. They're simply far too big. But that's yet another issue. That's a diseconomy of scale. But for the moment, a narrow production line will tend to have higher production costs because all the costs of the business are borne by one line of output. And secondly, there is reduced opportunities for economies of scale. Economies of size, generally speaking, are not associated with single line production, unless that one single line of production is phenomenally large. It has to develop some form of distinctive competency. So a single line of production, there must be core competencies within the production system, specialist machinery and skilled workers and so on. But is that sufficient to enable it to compete effectively in the marketplace? With a single line of production, for example, there is no opportunity to brand the product, to gain an efficiency due to distribution and an efficiency in marketing. So it's a single line of production which tends to restrict core competencies because they're only required for that single product. Higher production costs, all the costs of the organization falls on that product, and there are less opportunities to develop and exploit economies of scale. Now let's briefly look at restructuring and re-engineering. Well, restructuring involves streamlining the hierarchy of authority and reducing the number of levels. That's streamlining. So if you look at the class on tall and flat organizations, streamlining would be moving from a tall organization down to a flat organization. It's getting rid of some of the levels of the organization and trying to reduce the bureaucratic costs of the organization. So it's restructuring, trying to streamline the authority, the hierarchy of authority, I should say, and reducing the number of levels. That's the idea behind restructuring. It's downsizing the workforce to reduce costs. Not all the workforce may be necessary. There may be duplication in the workforce. Or some of the workforce may be employed just to service the organization itself, because the organization is so complex. Well, by simplifying the organization, by restructuring the organization, that cost may be saved. Now, the reasons for these changes, well, it could be a change in the business environment. This could be forced on the organization. The economy may be changing, and it means that levels of income in the economy are falling, let's say, so that consumers have less to spend. They're becoming more discriminating in what they buy, and the company needs to restructure to be competitive. Or it could be that competitors, perhaps from overseas, are entering the market, and market share has been lost, so they need to restructure to cut costs, to cut prices, to regain their position in the market. That's one possibility. It could be also that they've simply got excess capacity and they need to restructure to optimize the use of resources. It may be that the existing production facilities is too big. There's wasted space, or there's wasted office space. So restructuring makes sense to cut costs and optimize on the use of capacity. As I said earlier, it could be that the organization simply grew too tall and inflexible over time. It often happens that managers look for managers under them to deal with the next layer of managers. So they're inserting subordinates all the time. And this happens in many organizations. It happens in universities, it happens in the public sector, it happens in many companies, and particularly in large companies, where this can happen, where managers request a direct subordinate to help out. But after a while that becomes ossified, that becomes fixed, that position, and that becomes a managerial position, and that managerial position will look for someone just under him or her to help out again, and after a while it will be a very large, a very tall organization with many layers of bureaucracy. And restructuring simply looks critical at all of this and aims to reduce the costs. All of these in a way go to make up the point D on the screen. It's simply to improve competitive advantage and stay on top. The whole idea of restructuring is to improve the competitive advantage that the product has in the market, built on its core competencies, and enables it to stay on top by ensuring that it's charging a competitive price and that it's not overly expensive. Now we've looked at restructuring. Let's look at reengineering. This is a fairly big topic, and we're not going to do it anything like justice here. We're just going to introduce the concepts and move on. It's a fundamental rethinking and radical redesign of business processes to achieve dramatic improvements. So reengineering is looking critically at what has been done to see if it can be improved, to see if it can be changed. So it's perhaps looking at the final product and then working backwards from the final product to see how it can be done, how it can be improved, how the production process could be changed, how the output process, the process that the output passes through, can be altered so as to achieve dramatic improvements in terms of cost savings and efficiency. it doesn't really focus on the functions. It focuses on the processes which cut across the functions. It looks at the product itself and tries to re-engineer the product, to try to imagine ways of making the product differently, but which may be more efficient. Sometimes products are made because that's the way it's always been made. That's the way we first made it. And no one has got round to thinking about the product itself and to see if there's a better way of doing it. Well, re-engineering addresses this directly. Re-engineering looks at the product and attempts to come up with cost-saving methods, efficiency methods, and it re-engineers the product. It re-engineers the processes that go to make the product. Now, so in this session we've talked very briefly about what's meant by a narrow product line, a single product line, let's say, or a reduced product line, and looked at mostly the disadvantages of that. Then we talked about restructuring, and we had a few words about re-engineering. And that's all we want to do in this session, so we're going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.